Welcome to 3 Count, the brand new YouTube exclusive show presented by Squared Circle Radio, the show that is for the fans, by the fans. That's the young buck Andy York, and my name is Chris Belcher. You're a phenomenal host. We are so glad that you are checking our show out on our YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, what in the world are you waiting for? The button is right down below. Just hit the button. Like the video. Also, it helps in the algorithm. Drop a comment. We would appreciate that so much. We are here, Andy, on the heels of the Vince McMahon Docuseries release. We told everybody we were going to do this. Here we are, not our normal setup, but the show must go on. And man, we got to talk about it. There's so much to get to.
Yeah, there is. There's a lot to dive into, a lot of things that we were expecting, and I think a couple other things that we were not fully expecting at the same time. So it's just going to be a wild ride and a lot of fun. And, the discourse has already kind of started on social media as soon as it drops. Yep. And I think it's going to kind of continue for a little while. So it's going to be a wild time to dive into this and talk about it.
Yeah, we're definitely going to dive into it. Andy and I were talking before we hit record. We do not have a direction for this show. We literally tried to figure one out and we cannot. So we're just going to shoot from the hip in this episode. I know we debuted 3 Count last week and we sort of debuted a format, and we're totally deviating from that
2 weeks
in this episode. 2 weeks in. Surprise, surprise. But I want to start there, Andy. You talked about the Discord online. You talked about all of the opinions online that the wrestling community is obviously very famous for. I saw one today as I finished up watching the docuseries. I saw one today where someone was upset by saying that there was no new content in this docuseries, that they didn't learn anything about Vince. And I'm like, Are you better than Dave Meltzer? Are you this wrestling historian that you literally just knew everything? Like, Andy, I learned so much in this docuseries, and you know how big a fan that I've been of Vince, the promoter and the behind the scenes guy. I learned so much. Did you not?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot especially from the first couple of episodes, because up until I didn't watch wrestling, and I wasn't even alive for a majority of the things that they talked about in the first couple. And so it was really interesting to learn a lot of the behind the scenes things. I had heard some things before, but not like I'll give an example. I'm blanking on the guy's name at WrestleMania 1 that was trying to walk around trying to prove it was fake, and then he got smacked in the face for it. Yeah,
the reporter John. I don't remember what his last name
starts on the S. I think his last name starts on the S or something.
I think you're right. Yeah, Dr. D. David Schultz just smacked him
a couple times.
Yeah, that was hilarious. And then Hulk Hogan followed that up with choking a guy out right before WrestleMania and knocking the guy out, getting sued, and all the fun things. It was a wild time, man. I guess it wasn't that I learned a bunch of stuff. There was a whole lot of stuff on here that I forgot about. I'll tell you one thing that I did learn that was really, really interesting. As the WWE is starting as the WWF before WrestleMania 1, when they're trying to get their foot in the door in primetime TV and all that kind of stuff, I did not realize that Vince was a correspondent in the maternity ward for an episode of David Letterman, that they were waiting on a baby to be born. How funny is that?
I had no idea either, and it's such an out of character thing for him. Like, it just seems like such a random thing for him to do, but he got a couple people to laugh, and it kind of skyrocketed him to where he wanted to go. But yeah, I did not know that, and I was not expecting that at all.
I'll tell you this much, man. I think I talked about this on the episode this past Monday, is that I was really excited to see the behind the scenes promoter, Vince McMahon. And I think they nailed that in this docuseries. I think there was so much historical context as to what was going on during the time that Vince bought the territory from his dad, that he was building it up, how much he risked going into WrestleMania 1, and then just all the things thereafter. I know they touched on the WCW stuff when Bischoff came around and in the 90s, but they didn't touch on the wars that they had in the late 80s with closed circuit TV and going head to head Clash of Champions, WrestleMania 4, all that kind of stuff. So it just seemed like Vince kept saying it. It's like, it seemed like there was a storm coming at all times, whether it was trying to get WrestleMania off the ground or it was these random lawsuits that would happen, which could be their fault and it could not be their fault. I'm not saying him personally. I'm just saying the company as a whole. You have all those lawsuits, and then you have the steroid trial, and then you have Hogan, and then Savage, and then Hall and Nash, curtain call, and screw job, attitude era, going public. It's just like the XFL. All of these things. I mean, I guess it's the price of running a major corporation, right?
Yeah, and never really being satisfied with where you're at, I think, is another thing. Like he said several times throughout the documentary that he's the guy that has to be challenged every day. And if he's not, then he starts to come up with these like these wild and crazy ideas like the XFL and like the bodybuilding competition he tried to start, and then the steroid scandal happened. He was like, well, can't do that anymore. So gotta nix that. A couple other ideas that he's had in the past. But yeah, you just see like, he was never satisfied with where the business was. And, one of the things that I took away early on is, we kind of knew he didn't have the best childhood growing up, but like hearing some of the things that like him and his dad talked about and like the relationship that they had and everything else.
Yep.
I'm not going to say it explains why Vince is the way he is, but it plays a massive, massive role in the way that he is. And so, the good parts is like it got him the drive and the motivation and everything else. And the other end of it is, I mean, he literally said multiple times he'll cheat to win. He doesn't care. He's going to do whatever he can to move forward. So yeah, it's just, that was one of the things that stuck out to me was the relationship between him and his dad and how much that had a positive effect, but in the long term, man, it had such a negative impact on his life.
And it also had a negative impact on Shane's life because during the Shane McMahon stuff, like all I kept thinking was, man, this is exactly what Vince's dad did. This is exactly what we saw 3 episodes or 4 episodes ago or whatever it was. Yeah. Speaking of, before I forget to say this, I made a note that I wanted to say this. We count down a lot of things on this podcast. If this is your first time listening, go back and check out past episodes on the YouTube channel. This past Monday, we just counted down the top 10 Hell in a Cell matches of all time. We've done the Mount Rushmore of heel turns. So we do all kinds of fun lists and packages and stuff like that. But Andy, when we talk about the greatest returns that have ever happened in the wrestling business, buddy, Shane McMahon's better be top 5 every time. Like rewatching that and hearing him talk about it, gave me goosebumps just watching it. Like, holy cow, dude. You talk about out of nowhere.
Yeah. And it was out of nowhere, unexpected. Like nobody knew what was happening. And, that was my first real introduction to Shane, because by the time I started watching, he was already gone.
Right.
And so, I mean, I may have caught the very back end going into WrestleMania 25 with when it was Triple H and Randy Orton, and Randy was going around punting everybody. I think he punted Shane, and that wrote Shane off TV until he came back, I think in 2016 or something like that. So like that was my first like real introduction of seeing Shane, and like you said, his music hit and the place went ballistic.
Yep.
So it was crazy to go back and relive that.
You mentioned Vince's dad and the relationship that they had. I want to read this quote from Paul Heyman that really jumped out to me. He said, and I think it was in the first episode. He said the context of this quote is Vince Sr. and Vince Jr. arguing. And Paul Heyman said this: the clashes were mostly because of Vince Sr.'s lack of willingness to accept where the industry and the business was headed. My, oh my, how the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
I thought the exact same thing.
Like it's amazing how revolutionary Vince was in the 80s and how he brought this to another level. But it's also amazing how quickly that the tide turns, and it has to be somebody else to see the vision to take it to the stratosphere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was like looking, at 2010 Vince when that statement was made of, well, where was that mindset in 2010 through 2020 basically? Because that the 2010s year in WWE, man, is a dark time period for a lot of it, especially that 2013, 2014, even 2015, like before the Shield showed up. It was really rough to kind of see all of that take place. So, I thought the exact same thing. And another thing that I kind of pointed out that I think Paul Heyman brought up was that conversation between Shane and Vince.
Yes.
That's like, very psychotic to say that to your son. To be like, you're going to have to kill me if you want this. And I need to know if you're man enough to actually do it like I was going to do to my dad. And it's like, that lets me know that you're either lying about it now, or you kind of had this psychotic mindset from the beginning, from the off.
Yeah, it's crazy to sit and think about. Well, he said countless times on the show he doesn't know where Vince begins and where Mr. McMahon ends, and vice versa.
The same person. They're not the same person, though. He made sure to point that out multiple times. They're not the same person, though.
But they are, because look how many people right after that. Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker,
Bruce Pritchard even
said, "Yeah, they're the same. Yep, they're the same."
Hulk Hogan said they're the exact same person.
Yep, exactly. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna believe those guys. One thing that I wanted to bring up that Triple H said that I'd never heard before. We're talking about the business changing and all that kind of stuff. This was after the curtain call that he told Vince that the embrace that happened at the end of the night at Madison Square Garden between Shawn Michaels, Diesel, Razor Ramon, and Triple H on their last night in, the hug that they shared was the biggest reaction of the show that night. And that told Triple H that the business was changing and that they needed to head in that direction. And Vince's quote was, or Triple H told him he needed to change with the times. And Vince said, maybe, but not right now. It's like, I know that you don't want to take an immediate step. Ultimately, he did take that step and let Austin do his thing. And we did go in a different direction. He didn't realize it at the time, but man, it just goes to show you, like, there's so many personal examples in here. We talk about all the time how Vince doesn't change with the times. There's so many examples in here of people verifying that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not a new thing that just happened the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's something that's it looks like it's outside of when he took over the territories, which that's a conversation that we could have at some point. Because there's an argument, I think, out there that while it was revolutionary, I don't know if it was necessarily the best thing for professional wrestling as a whole. Having just one massive group out there taking over everything while, everything else kind of falls off. But I think it's fascinating to see that, the Attitude Era wouldn't have really happened if it wasn't for the curtain call in a lot of ways. WCW may have forced them, but the way things were going in Vince's mindset, because he kind of even said this in the documentary, his mindset, he was taking too long to get to that point. Like WCW had already gone into the gritty, the realism, everything else, while WWF was a comic book is basically what they said. It was just people going out there doing stupid things and, goofy characters and this, that, and the other. So I think that's spot on of who Vince kind of was throughout his entire run. Was he either jumped on at the very last second, or he completely missed the boat on what he was supposed to do or where the business was moving and where the business was heading.
Yeah, there was lots of changes, both good, bad, indifferent in the way that he went. And yeah, I think there's an argument to be made, like you said, of the territory days and Vince buying everybody out and, all that. There's an argument to be made that wasn't good. But then you saw in 1996, the exact same thing happened to Vince when Hall, Nash, Hogan, Savage, DiBiase, Sean Waltman, all those guys went to WCW for a better paycheck and less dates. That's exactly what Vince did. So,
Yeah.
you know, what comes around goes around in the
He didn't like it, though.
business. No,
he did not like it. And trying to listen to him like weasel his way out of them being like, but can't you see how that's like exactly the same thing you did? Well, no, it's not.
No, it's not. No,
Yeah,
no, it's
yeah,
not.
it is. It's the exact same thing.
Let's go there for a minute. It's amazing. And let's not go scandal route just yet, because we do need to talk about that, because that was a huge part of this.
Yeah.
But let's talk about how Vince's, I can't believe I'm about to say this because there's so much weight with what I'm about to say, how Vince's mind works and how he has justified a lot of things, and how we can sit and poke fun at it all we want, but it's also scary in some senses of the way that he justifies things. Like, for example, let's talk about Chris Benoit. That was one of the biggest things that stuck out to me in the documentary. I'm so glad they touched on it. So glad that they went down this road. I think you can't have a production that is done outside of the WWE to talk about the history of wrestling and not talk about it. WWE is the only one that won't talk about it. So I'm glad they talked about it. But when they asked Vince about it, he did not believe at all that Chris had any kind of brain injury. I think he even said, I think I wrote it down here. He said, where is it? Oh, I didn't write it down specifically. Just him talking about, hey, that's the way we wrestle. Like, all of that was not an issue because he's protected and he was doing everything right. And yeah, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But you're going to sit here and tell me that you knew that dude and you were just turning a blind. I'm not saying that, I guess, anybody that's capable of that, we can't understand why they would do it. But you knew the guy.
Yeah.
Like, you never would see that side of him. So why would you think that's there? I don't know. I just thought it was so weird how he justified that. No, he didn't have any brain issues when he did that.
Yeah. That, like, that whole, segment where they talked about, which I'm sure we're going to talk about all this, but they had talked about Chris Benoit and they jumped into the Undertaker and a couple other things.
Yeah, go there. Yeah, for sure.
It was weird to hear him talk about it, and then them cut to that doctor who was a former wrestler talk about WWE's perspective, because he was like, yeah, they were like the first ones to jump in on this and like help us out, and then Vince on the other end is like, yeah, like he did this because he was a monster, not because of the concussions.
Yeah.
Or, the wild one, like, I mean, that's obviously wild, but like the other one, like, yeah, Mark wasn't upset Mark doesn't remember the match, not because of a concussion, but just because it was so traumatic that he lost.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, there were like, I could look at 5 or 6 spots in that match, because I still don't think you've gone back to watch it since it happened.
I watched it one time.
Okay. There are like 5 or 6 spots in that match where I see Taker hit his head on something. And it's like, that the concussion really could have been there. It could have been there. It could have been. So like, it's not just this thing that obviously didn't happen. Like, it clearly happened, because he wasn't just going to faint and pass out and have to go to the hospital because he was so traumatized by losing a match at WrestleMania. Like, that just doesn't make sense, especially if you're talking about The Undertaker.
Yep.
Like, that just doesn't add up at all. So talking about that, and then talking about, Chris Benoit being this monster, and I'm not going down the Vince route at all, because I believe he did the things because he didn't have, his brain was messed up. His brain was absolutely messed up. You look at those scans that they showed, and you can tell his brain was absolutely messed up. And maybe it enhanced some of his tendencies because he also was on steroids and there's roid rage and everything else. But it's like Bret Hart, I think, said, I've seen a lot of guys have roid rage and it doesn't cause them to kill their entire family and themselves.
Right.
So like there's something doesn't add up somewhere. And just to blatantly say, yeah, he was just a monster, while there's other evidence of other things, just kind of shows how he like only focuses on what he wanted, what he wants, and nothing else matters, whether it's the truth or not.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. And as successful as he's been for the longest time, I feel like he has to be able to paint his own narrative and convince people of that in order for his business to work. Yeah, exactly. He's been doing it for years. He releases a statement. He gets upset about this documentary and that it doesn't paint the whole picture. It doesn't tell the whole truth. Well, Vince, buddy, you've been doing that for 40 years now, at least.
Yeah.
So, like, again, what comes around goes around. Let's circle back to Bret Hart for a minute, because I want to talk about the Montreal screw job for a second. They spent a lot of time focusing on this. Wasn't the original screw job. They opened up this episode, I think it was episode 3, with Wendy Richter, which I knew about, but I didn't make the connection of that being the original.
It wasn't his first time.
Right. Right, for sure. But I felt it was very, very interesting to see different angles of the screw job that we didn't have before, to hear Bret say, oh, there was no, I'll let you get a shot in. He said that was never a thing, which, okay, I'm with you. Here's what, and this is probably the Shawn Michaels fan coming out in me, but Bret talking about how he went on and on about how he gave everything for Vince for 14 years. He's saying, I took front turnbuckles and I did this and I wasn't hurt and I never missed a day and blah, 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 blah. He said, in that day at Montreal, none of it mattered. Well, Bret, I hate to tell you, I'm going to take Vince's side on this, because of all of that crap that you gave him, you were willing to give him. And he gave you the belt. He made you the face of the company. He wanted to make you the highest paid guy. He asked for one thing in return. One. And you couldn't drop the belt because you didn't want to. That's what he asked for in return. I'm not saying that Vince should have screwed Bret, because I'm a Shawn fan. Take that out of it. I just always have held Bret responsible for that.
Well, and it wasn't even that he didn't want to lose. It's not that he didn't want to give up the belt. He didn't want to lose it to Shawn, obviously.
Uh-huh.
But also, he didn't want to lose it in Canada at the same time. So, wasn't there another plan where on Raw, he was going to drop it to somebody and then that person was going to take it from, or Shawn was going to take it from that person, or something like that? The
plan was that I think last minute he offered to drop it at a house show the night before. And then I think there was a plan of he was going to come out on Raw and just give the belt up. Well, he wasn't under contract the next night on Raw, so Vince didn't want to take that chance. And he had the big title match, so he didn't want to do the house show match. So for all of the things that we give Vince crap for, I mean, Bret put him in a bad position, and he protected his business. He did what was best for business.
Yeah. And I get both sides of it. I really do. And I love that Shawn was even like, oh yeah, I would have hated me then too. There's no reason for anybody to like me at all during that time period. But and I get Bret not wanting to lose it in his hometown. He's done all this stuff for Vince. He was promised a 20-year deal, and then all of a sudden Vince says, no, I can't really pay it, so go to WCW. That would leave a bad taste in my mouth too. That would make that would leave me a little upset. Sure. So I get both sides of it. However, Vince did not handle it well at all. Doing what he did was very stupid. And listen to guys like The Undertaker, who was like, oh, I was mad about it. It made me upset. And when Bret walks back through the locker room, there's Ken Shamrock is standing there, and there's a couple other people who are going to make sure that nothing happens to Bret. They stood up for Bret that night. Everybody was with Bret that night. And just seeing, it's always so awkward to me seeing the interaction between Bret and Shawn in the locker room, where Bret was like, did you know? And we all know Shawn knew, and he lies through his teeth. Yep. But then they cut out to the hallway where Triple H is talking to his wife, and it's like, this is just, there's something not right about this at all that just doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, and going back to Taker talking about it, I think he said in an interview, or somebody said in an interview at one point, I don't remember exactly, but like the logical solution would have been for Brett to drop it to Taker instead of Shawn, because Taker was going to face Shawn at the Royal Rumble in the casket match.
Yeah.
Anyway, they had just had the Hell in a Cell match, so
Yeah.
just drop it to Taker and
then
he
Shawn
can drop
win it there. Yeah.
Exactly. It would have made too much sense. While we're on Brett, let's talk about Owen. The other thing that they talk about that, again, WWE doesn't want to talk about, but they talk about in this documentary, is the death of Owen Hart. I will say this. This is one thing that I learned in this docuseries that I absolutely didn't know. And that was the situation with the harness. Now, I knew Owen's harness was defective, and I knew that people were aware of that. But the details of that, the manufacturer is the one that knew and went ahead with it. And then the fact that everybody leaves out, because everybody blames the WWE for it, and everybody says, oh, they were negligent, blah, blah, blah. And then Martha sues the WWE, blah, blah. Well, what everybody conveniently leaves out is that WWE sued the manufacturer for allowing a defective product to be used.
Yeah.
And everybody just leaves that out. Everybody also leaves out the fact that there was a police officer in Kansas City who called Bret Hart personally and said, this was an accident, man. Like they didn't do anything wrong. This was an accident. So I just find it so convenient, the narrative through the years, whether people are intentionally trashing WWE or not, the narrative over the years did not include those two huge details.
Yeah. And, credit to, I think it was Brett too, when he said in this documentary, like when that police officer called me and told me it was an accident, and he's like, okay, like I'm fine. Like I know it was an accident now, cause I get Brett's side of it too at that time, right after the screw job, everything else, Vince is crazy, but is he crazy enough to kill my brother to get back at me for it? And part of him was probably like, yeah, he like there's a part of Vince that probably has thought about it at some point or something.
Well, yeah, if he's willing to tell Shane, hey, here's the knife, right here, put it right here.
Yeah. So, just doing that and hearing that, and there was something that really interesting to hear Vince too talk about it, because he was like, Brett was upset about it and like said he like trashed our company like a brother should when their brother dies because of within another company. Like he didn't hold at fault at that at all of, any brother would have done that. Like a brother would be stupid not to do that. I will say this. We leave out those two parts, and I agree that they should be brought up. But the decision to continue on with the show is a horrible decision to go on with. I know those people paid their money. I know those people wanted to be there. To send Jeff Jarrett, who was one of Owen Hart's best friends, on camera right after it is ridiculous. Like there has to be something. And I know what he said of, if it was me in that ring, I'd want the show to go on. But you got to think about everyone else that's involved, man. And like wrestling there, watching people wrestle with Owen's blood still in the ring, dude, that's so hard to watch.
Dude, that's what stuck out to me, is I didn't realize that, because I've never watched that pay-per-view beginning to end to this day. I just not that I can't. I've just chosen not to, just because there's nothing else on that pay-per-view that appeals to me. So, but I did not realize, because now, dude, we see all the time during commercial breaks how many times they change the mat and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And apparently they didn't do that in 1999. So they had to wrestle the rest of the night with the blood right there. Dude, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I credit to everybody that night that finished the show. Like, I don't know how they did it. Credit to JR and to Jerry the King Lawler for pushing through and everything else. Like, credit to them. But they should have never been put in that situation to continue on with the show.
No,
like that to me is just a horrible decision to make.
And not only that, but Vince made it a point, and I think Bruce made it a point too, to say that they didn't tell the live crowd that Owen had died.
Right.
Well, guess what, geniuses? If you would have told the live crowd that Owen Hart died, I don't think you would have had people be upset for you canceling the show.
No, they'd have been like, yes, please can't. Like, we literally just saw a dead man be rolled out of here.
Now you would have out of the probably, let's say there were 12,000 people there, you would have probably had 1,000 people that would have asked for refunds, and you would have rightly given it to them.
Yeah,
but I don't think, for the most part, I don't think there would have been a riot. I don't think it. No, not at all.
And you just got to think long-term ramifications too. Like, if I was at this show and then I get home and find out that he died. That's not okay. Like, that's not cool with me to find out later, but two, be like, you continued on with the show after that man just died in the ring.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We have to talk about all of the craziness of Vince and his, not just the current allegations, but how many things through the years.
Been sued a lot.
Yes, he has.
He's been sued a lot.
What stuck out to you in watching this, with all these legal things that came out, with the steroids and the previous sexual misconduct stuff, and all the stuff about Pat Patterson, and then you have we already talked about the reporters getting knocked out. And then you have the interview with Bob Costas and the interview with Armin Katayan and all that, where Vince almost explodes on both of them. Of all of those things, what stood out to you?
Well, one, I did not know about the Ring Boy lawsuit. I did not know about that. So that one... That was one of the early episodes when that came out. I was like, how have I not heard about this? But two, what in the world are we doing? Like, what is going on? That one stuck out to me a lot. And the thing, and it's the sad thing, and I'm not going to include the steroid scandal in this one, because I think because all the wrestlers talked about it. I don't think he told anybody to do steroids.
Right.
He didn't.
I was shocked at how many people. I was shocked at how many people were blatantly on camera that said, "No, he didn't tell me to do it." No,
right.
He didn't tell me to do it. No,
like Bret Hart, who doesn't mind saying the truth about Vince. Like, he doesn't care to tell the truth about Vince. Or Tony Atlas. Like, Tony Atlas was one of my favorite parts of this entire thing, because he didn't care what he said. It seemed like he just kind of said things. But I just hearing them say that, and then that's the only thing I'm going to exclude out of this. But even then, this kind of falls into it. Money talks, power talks, and power corrupts. And that is what I think is they talked about at the end, the legacy of Vince McMahon is power and corruption.
Yep.
I think that just fits him perfectly, because I think he's said it multiple times, I've got a lot of lawyers and they're going to beat you every single time. You can sue me all you want and they're going to beat you. I don't think he's going to get past it this time. I think it finally caught up with him. And so, that's whatever your opinion is on it. I think it's a very good thing. But just money talks and power talks, and Vince had a lot of it during his run.
Yep.
And he got out of a lot of things just by wheeling and dealing. And, it was crazy to see some of the things that he got out of. And it's crazy to see some of the things that just kind of went away and kind of fell apart. And then you get to the new stuff with Janelle Grant, obviously. And that one's horrific to hear about and talk about. But then all the stuff about Ashley comes out, and it's man, this that one's heartbreaking. Just heartbreaking to hear that one. So, it just, I don't think Vince is any different today than he was 10, 15, 20 years ago. I just think time has finally caught up with him, and he didn't cover his tracks enough times, and he's finally getting caught. And so I think a lot of things, I don't think we're done. I think there's a lot more things that come to light, and I think it's going to get way, way worse for him as we move forward.
A lot to unpack here. I will say the thing that shocked me the most was the scandal about the female referee in the 80s. I did not realize that happened.
Yeah, I mean,
and so yeah, that was interesting for sure. The Ashley Mazzaro stuff to me was the hardest thing to watch in this 6-part series.
Yeah,
I was not. I think probably because we know most everything, at least for right now, in this Janelle Grant stuff. So none of that shocked me. They didn't bring anything new to light on that. Just different sources talking about how they found out and yeah, that kind of thing. So none of that shocked me. And all of the stuff through the years, maybe I didn't know about it, but it didn't shock me. It was like, oh, behavior has a pattern.
Yeah.
And it continues. Okay, great. But dude, the Ashley Mazzaro stuff was so hard to watch. It really, really was. Especially the scene that they showed where he suspended her on camera. Bro, the context of that is just, it's insane, man. That was so hard.
Yeah. And, I know a lot of people look at the Attitude Era with rose tinted glasses because there was a lot of great, like it was one of the biggest boom periods in WWE history. And I get that
for sure. Yeah.
And there's a lot of great stuff that came out of it. Like there's a lot of great stuff, but going back and seeing some of the things that they did during this time period
and the ruthless aggression era.
Yeah. And like the things that they didn't, like the things that they did makes me wonder, what didn't they do? Like what else was on the table? We know the obvious one was Stephanie, but like what other ones did he have in mind?
Yeah.
That were so horrific and so bad that everybody else was like, no, we can't do that. Like that is crossing the line.
Yeah.
That stuck out to me a lot. And it also, if you look at the history of Vince, everything that happened with him storyline wise, I believe, especially when it dealt with other women, came from a place that he didn't get caught and he was putting it on TV or getting accused of it and was like, I'll just put it on TV. Like, you want to do that? Great story. Let's run with it.
Well, that's exactly what happened with the tanning stuff. The tanning, when they accused him, the person at the tanning salon accused him of sexual misconduct, he put it on TV.
Yep.
So you have, I was going to say, you have to think the stuff with Sable, the stuff with Trish. They showed some stuff of him with, I think it was Christy Hemme. I could be wrong. But they showed several other women that they didn't dive into. But I'll say this, and this is revolutionary. You can mark it down on your podcast. Make sure that you hold me accountable for this because I'm about to say something nice about Dave Meltzer. Here we go. He was on this show enough. I had to find something good, and I did. In episode 6, Dave Meltzer said this. If Vince had any defense, talking about all of these new allegations, if he had any defense, he would have gone after those reporters and their credibility, and he didn't. And that's not like Vince.
Yep.
He is 110% right.
Yeah. Yeah. The fact that as soon as these things happened, he announced his retirement. And like didn't go back, didn't send out like a tweet saying like, none of this is true or blah, blah, blah. Like they tried to do the promo thing. And then like the next week, like that Friday he retired and everything else. And it kind of went from there. Like if he's the kind of person that if you try to go after him, unless you have solid proof that he cannot deny, he's going to go right back after you. And he did not do that this time. So that stuck out to me too. I'll also say this about Dave. I thought he actually wasn't that bad during this whole thing. Like, I thought the things that he said, he was pretty insightful, and he's a wrestling historian, and this was like his moment to show that. and it kind of came through, unless you talk about WrestleMania 3 attendances, and then that's neither here or there, because that's the dumbest argument and the dumbest debate in wrestling history.
It's so stupid. It's so
but
stupid.
yeah, like I just seeing the things that came to light the last year or so, and seeing the things that he has been accused of in the past, cannot at this point be pure coincidences.
No, absolutely
like, at
not.
some point we just have to use like common sense and logic and put 2 and 2 together, and that's finally starting to happen, it feels like.
I think it was episode 2 where they were talking about being bad guys, and they really went in depth on the Sergeant Slaughter Iraqi turn thing. Yeah. And Vince said on there, he's like, look, like, at that time we played into pop culture and what was trending in pop culture. That's sort of what we mirrored. And they still do that some to this day, and they've done it more recently. But his point was, it worked because that's what you see in the movies. So we were that form of entertainment. So that worked. But he said, but we probably couldn't do that today. It wouldn't age well today. It's like, well, buddy,
you tried.
There's a lot of stuff that you did that didn't age well then and still doesn't age well to this day.
No, I'm shocked that they did not talk about the like Taliban guys that attacked Undertaker that one time. Do you remember that?
Muhammad Hussain or whatever?
Yeah, like that whole storyline. Like, I'm shocked they didn't talk about that. There's just like, there are a lot of things that from pop culture reference that worked. And I'll give an example. I don't remember. I think it may have been WrestleMania 3. Was that Piper and Goldust?
It all goes back to, no, that was WrestleMania 12.
Okay. Anyways, where they did the OJ scene of
yes,
like that was great. Like, that was funny. That made sense. Like, that whole thing was done great. When you start talking about political things, though, or not even necessarily political things, when you start talking about war and like, you know, if I had a son or daughter who is like overseas fighting there, and I see this on my TV, this isn't taking me out of reality and putting me in this show. This is like bringing reality back, and that's not what you're looking for, you know, in that moment. And I don't think it worked very well, or it worked too well, because Slaughter was getting death threats and everything else.
Yeah. It's a fine line, and obviously Vince wouldn't be where he is today success-wise, and the WWE wouldn't be where it is if he didn't take chances. You know, that's what this whole thing was about too, is him taking chances. A lot of it worked, and a lot of it didn't work.
Did not work.
No. Well, we talked about Vince, and we sort of ran him into the ground, and we don't have to talk about all of the specifics. All that is out there, and this docuseries is out there. Everybody go watch it. It's on Netflix. We're not going to tell you every single thing about it, but what I will say is I want to try to bring this back to some sort of positivity, because at the end of the day, Vince McMahon, as bad as a human being as he has been to some people, he has been an incredible human being to others. You heard Bruce Pritchard tell the story about his wife having cancer and Vince helping get the best care for her possible. And she's lived 20 years past her expected lifespan. And that's a good human doing that. You heard Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Trish Stratus, John Cena talk about how he was a father figure to them specifically. And I've said this before, for all of the people that he may treat badly, and I'm not saying that he picks his favorites, he probably does, but let's remove the entertainment aspect from it. They're still human beings, and he still went out of his way to take care of those human beings. So whether we say, where does the Vince person end and begin, and where does Mr. McMahon fit into all that? I don't know, but there's some decency in there somewhere. It just takes a lot for it to come out, I guess.
Yeah. It's hard to, in hindsight now, with everything that we know, it's hard to talk about decency with him and like
Agreed.
being more like moral about anything. Obviously the way that Stephanie talks about him, she respects him and loves him, and Shane, that whole story of him just saying he literally did whatever he could just to get show that his dad was proud of him and loved him. Like we talked about, was cut and paste of Vince growing up as well with his dad.
Because we didn't bring this up specifically, but the only time Vince ever heard Vince Sr. say that he loved him was the day before that he died.
Yeah. Yeah. And even at WrestleMania 32, you see the backstage interaction of Shane and Vince hugging, and you can read Vince's lips saying, "I'm proud of you and I love you." That kind of moment. You can still tell to this day, that means a lot to Shane. And he's done some things throughout the years that have been good. He's helped a lot of people. He's started careers like Cena and Trish, and we ran down the list. So he's done some good things.
He brought Cody Rhodes back from AEW.
He did do that.
Cody said it in that documentary. It showed backstage WrestleMania 38. Cody said, "Thank you for coming to get me."
Yeah. So he's done a lot of good things, but
he's also done a lot of terrible things.
The good does not outweigh the bad here at all.
I want to go back to the point that you made a few minutes ago as we get ready to wind this thing down. Appreciate you guys being with us again. This is our 3-count YouTube exclusive show. This will not be on our podcast feed. So make sure that you tell a friend if they want to hear us talk about the Vince McMahon docuseries. It's on our YouTube channel. And if you're not subscribed, please do that. As we wind down here, I want to go back to the legacy comment that you brought up just a few minutes ago about what is Vince's legacy going to be. Power and corruption is what you said. And I don't know what I would define his legacy as. I love what Tony Atlas said, that he's the greatest promoter of all time. I think we can all agree with that no matter if you agree with the way he, took away the territory business and made it one big global phenomenon, he's changed the wrestling business forever. He had some crazy vision. He took some crazy chances, and it absolutely worked. Did he have a whole lot of help doing that? With Hulk Hogan and Mr. T and all, daggum right he did, for sure. But what is Vince's legacy? I don't know that I can answer that. But what was so profound to me, Andy, was that all of those stars that he was so close to, none of them can answer it either.
Yeah.
Hulk Hogan, Shawn Michaels, John Cena, The Undertaker, none of them could answer that question.
Yeah. That stuck out to me too. And that kind of goes to show the whole theme of this was nobody knows who truly Vince McMahon is. You may know what you see, you may know what I tell you, but you don't know who Vince really is. And I think that's kind of the underlining thing of what is his legacy going to be? If his legacy ended 10, 15 years ago, it probably ended a very different way than it does today.
Yep.
And so it's just, his discussion of his legacy and how he's going to be remembered, I think is something we're going to talk about probably until he passes. That's something that's going to be continuously brought up and discussed and talked about. And even then we're still probably going to discuss it and talk about it, the impact and the things that he left behind. I will say this I'll give another positive thing out of this.
Okay.
And I think I saw somebody else say this, and I completely agree. Everything that Vince did during the Attitude Era that succeeded, Triple H has kind of taken and has molded it into this new era and doing it he's doing the similar things just in a different way.
Sure.
So he's taking back, like making pop culture references and being involved in it, and like, you know, being that front line of in the culture of everything that's going on. And, you know, Cardi B is now going to be doing a thing. She's like her song is for SmackDown, I believe. And like, she's going to, I think she's going to do SummerSlam as well. And like a couple other things, like doing the culture thing. Sexy Red was on NXT and then got arrested the next week for fighting at the airport. Just like they're doing these things that worked in the Attitude Era, but they're keeping, and this is the thing Vince never did, keeping professional wrestling at the center of it all.
Yeah.
Like, is it entertainment? Absolutely. But at the core of everything that's going on today is still professional wrestling.
Correct.
And it all comes back to professional wrestling.
And I don't know what the motivations for Cardi B and for Sexy Red and for people like that. Maybe they're in it just for a payday. Maybe they're not. The point that I'm trying to make is Triple H is doing it to the extent of getting guys that want to be there and that are willing to be there. Look at Bad Bunny and all the work that Bad Bunny put in. I just listened
Pat McAfee.
Yeah, Pat McAfee. I just listened to Damian Priest on Chris Van Vliet's show, and he was talking about his relationship with Bad Bunny and the match in Puerto Rico, and how he was talking to Bad Bunny, and Bad Bunny said that he couldn't get out of bed for 4 days after that street fight because of how bad he was hurting. But Priest also talked about how much work that Bunny put into that match. So Triple H is getting guys that are willing to do things. You mentioned Pat McAfee. You know, there's huge list of guys that are doing things like that. So completely agree with your point. To your point about Vince and us not knowing, like Vince said very early in the first episode, I don't want anybody to know who I am.
Yeah.
He said, I don't want people to know who I am. So if you don't want people to know who you are, and if you say, he said this in the documentary too, he said, what I say a lot of times is totally different than what I think. And the public doesn't understand that. Well, of course,
no doubt.
Yeah, of course we don't understand because we don't know what's truth and what's lie. So at the end of the day, the sad reality is Vince McMahon either has been all his life, or when he decided to get into the wrestling business, has turned into Mr. McMahon before it was an on-screen character, and he doesn't know how to get back to the real person.
Yeah, and listen, that last monologue from Vince, where at like the very last episode where he's talking about how some people get so in depth with the character that they don't know when to turn it off. They don't know anymore when they're the character and when they're the person. And that happened to Vince long time ago.
Yep.
And, you know, that has probably played into everything that he's done, played into how he thinks, his motivations. His on-screen character did whatever he could, did whatever he wanted because nobody was going to stop him. And that feels like the Vince McMahon that we see outside of TV as well.
Yep.
From the steroid trial to everything else, that's kind of been his MO. So it's sad to see it. It's sad to see somebody ruin their life and destroy their life. And that's what he's done. And, you know, kind of watching this documentary, it made me feel bad for Stephanie. And it made me feel bad for Shane. And it made me feel bad for Linda, even though she kind of played into it during the Attitude Era, which we learned about in this documentary some.
It's very interesting.
But then seeing Shane's kids walk out at WrestleMania 32 made me go, man, what are these grandkids thinking? Like, these poor kids have to go through this now. And like
Triple H and Stephanie's kids are older than Shane's kids.
Exactly. And so, you know, it's difficult for the kids. Like the kids, it's very difficult. But for the grandkids to see their grandfather being, you know, doing all these things and seeing this person that you respected and you loved and seeing all these things happen, just, you know, I don't know how I would react. Like, I don't know what I would do. So it kind of broke my heart for them. And obviously, like, it broke my heart for the people that the lawsuit is with now And it broke my heart for all the other people that didn't get a chance to have this moment to call him out on it.
Yeah.
Throughout the years too. So that's one of those things that, is an unfortunate part of the world we live in. And it's hard to get past it sometimes.
Yep. It definitely is. That's for sure. If we sound somber and we sound a little defeated and taken aback, it's because we are. And if you haven't watched the 6-part docuseries on Mr. McMahon on Netflix, please go do that. It's eye-opening. We didn't even touch the tip of the iceberg for what you're going to see in that docuseries. So please go back and watch it. All right, Andy, let's put a bow on this episode, man. Appreciate all of you guys being with us, checking us out on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video. Leave us some feedback below. We would very much appreciate it. Love getting those comments from you guys. As we put a bow on this one, Andy, man, anything else you want to add that we haven't?
Apparently Stone Cold Steve Austin's not a CTE guy.
It's very interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting.
That and Taker's hate for video games goes long before the last couple of years, because that video of him rolling his eyes in the 90s was hilarious.
Yeah, that was really funny. I think one of the things that stuck out to me as we get ready to wrap up here is I know that Hogan and Vince were close over the years, but I didn't realize that as Hogan, as the government star witness in the steroid trial, how much he flipped the script on them. And essentially he's the one that got Vince off, and he explained all of that. Hogan did. He did a great job. I know we rag on Hogan all the time for taking credit for everything and, whatever. You said Tony Atlas earlier. I thought Hogan was great in this docuseries. I thought he would hold back a lot more. I didn't think we'd see him as much as we did. I thought Hogan was great, man. I did.
Yeah, it's just hard to trust anything he says half the time, but he handled it well. Do you know? So, not to chase a rabbit at the very end, but
here we go.
I'm going to chase it anyway. Is the story about him and Andre at WrestleMania true? Do you know?
I've heard that several times before, so okay. I would assume that it is. Okay. Now, I've heard the story from Hogan, Vince, and Bruce. So
3 guys who are known for telling the truth.
I'm just saying. If I had to place a bet, I would say that it's true, and the reason is because it doesn't go back to anything that they've said or the creative. It goes back to how big of a prankster that Andre was and how much fun he would have had holding that over Hogan's head. So yes, I would say that it's true for that reason.
That makes sense.
Yeah. All right. That's going to do it. What a fun episode. Different episode of the 3 Count. We will be back next Friday on YouTube for another episode of the 3 Count. But before that, as you see on your screen, a new episode of Squared Circle Radio is going to drop this Monday after Raw. What are we going to talk about? We're previewing Bad Blood. It's next Saturday. It's a loaded card. We're both very excited to talk about it. So that's coming to you on Monday right after Raw. So make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. We would appreciate that so very much. All right, for Mr. Andy York, my name is Chris Belcher. Thank you for being with us. Hit that like button on your way out. We would appreciate that so much. This has been another episode of 3 Count. We'll see you on Monday for a new episode of Squared Circle Radio.